I'm Dean Walker, and welcome to the Poetry of Predicament podcast, a podcast for people brave enough to face humanity's challenges and problems, and most importantly, our numerous predicaments. The Poetry of Predicament is a podcast meant to inspire us to bring forth grace, beauty, and connection with the web of life in the face of a predicament-laden world. In this episode of the Poetry of Predicament podcast and our second podcast, Take My Hand, Conscious Parenting in a Time of Stolen Dreams, welcome Buddhist pastoral counselor Beth Fairservis as she brings community and family resilience through creativity, shared play, and co-regulating ritual in her community. Hi there. This is Dean Walker from the Poetry of Predicament podcast and also the Take My Hand, Conscious Parenting in Times of Stolen Dreams, both of those podcasts. And this particular episode will be appropriate for both of those podcasts. Quite a remarkable person, counselor and Buddhist pastoral counselor Beth Fairservis will be speaking with us about her parenting in these extraordinarily troubled times, and also the work that she does outward facing, public facing in her world. I think you'll find that this is another example of someone and a family who is so well resourced within themselves individually, and then of course, in their family unit, and then enough so that she then takes that out into her work in the public sphere. Quite a remarkable conversation. Why I'm doing this little introduction video moment is, we started in a way just to get to know one another. We started conversationally, and as almost always happens, Beth really went into detail about her life and what it's like to produce the kind of events that she produces, which I think you're going to find extraordinary. And I really didn't want to cut out that conversational, getting to know you conversation that we had. So I hope you'll just forgive me for including it. I didn't realize how much I'd want to do that until starting to do this final editing. So if you'll just bear with the more conversational nature of it, it's a bit random. We do eventually get to an official starting point, which you'll recognize. And I hope in some way that this will be valuable for you. It was certainly valuable for me, really an extraordinary connection of clearly a kindred spirit and someone who can offer a tremendous amount of value in terms of sharing her resourcing individually and then also within her family and her professional services as well. So I hope you enjoy this interview with Beth Fairservis.
Started becoming aware of global warming like almost 30 years ago. So I've always been thinking about it, and I've been watching it happen. And so that's had a huge effect on me. And I started doing large scale events around climate change in the Northampton area now really more than 10 years ago. I did performance art before then. That was more abstracted, more sort of oriented towards adults. And then I had my son 14 years ago. And when I had him that first year, I had him on my back, and I was out there with this big earth and the giant Mother Earth. And I was like getting people together and saying, look, we've got only a certain amount of time here, and we've got to wake up to it. And every year since then, I've done some kind of event around that. And I'm kind of known in this area as being a climate activist using street theater. But in the middle of that, I've gone and studied I've done a lot of work in birth work around parenting, and I've also become a Buddhist pastoral counselor and got my master's in Buddhist pastoral counseling and body-centered psychotherapy. So right now I'm a kind of a synthesizer. My dad was an archaeologist and a generalist and really looked at the whole world and the big picture. And so I have, by osmosis, I have tremendous contact with indigenous culture, with arts, with particularly the arts in relationship to culture building. And right now I'm working on a book, The Way of the Joyous Warrior, I think is what it's going to be called, but people are beginning to know me as the Joyous Warrior. That's kind of what I'm using on my social media, developing a program for working with people to become joyous warriors, where you can be embodied in the face of what we're going through, and then having this sort of elastic sense that we still have choices, and that is utilizing the arts. And so I have a lot to talk about.
Yeah, you do.
Yeah.
Well, wonderful. And if you wouldn't mind, clearly there's a lot on what could be your CV or your resume, and I'm just curious, how do you describe yourself? For instance, in a new interaction, how do you introduce yourself? What is it you do?
I'm a Buddhist pastoral counselor, so I'm a therapist, basically. I spend a lot of time one-on-one with people, and I'm a climate theater activist. So I have a theater company called Musen, and I produce shows and events that have to do with how to live in right relationship with ourselves and with nature.
Wow.
Yeah.
You're right. We are we're in the right conversation here, you and I. Thank you very much for that.
Yes, I would love to hear about you too.
All right.
Tell me. So you're.
Well, I have always been someone very connected with both the earth through primarily my relationship with the ocean, and also with rather esoteric parts of the human experience that could be called the study of energetics, or aspects of what I have in my psycho-spiritual background also can come from shamanic roots. And little did I know, after going through a adult lifetime of doing a number of different kinds of training work in the executive realm, and also working with individuals and couples in empowerment and intimacy training, and training adults to work with at-risk youth in cities in the UK and the USA, and there are a number of other kinds of training, and almost all those having a transformation base to them. So a rather experiential based and an unpredictable inspiration for, and an invitation to an unpredictable amount of growth or expansion within that training environment. And so people tend to call that transformational. And so that's the kind of work that I got to do for a long time. And in these last 7 years or so, since I had my proverbial woke moment, I of course realized that not only is climate change happening in a more abrupt and intense fashion than we hear about in the regular world, but I also stumbled into a handful of other even more urgent metrics of our impact on the planet, really having very little to do with the climate change aspect. And so I I wrote a book about my process of learning how to learn about those impacts. And because I'm not a scientist, and I'm even further from being a climate scientist, but I'm fairly conversant at this point. And really, what I decided once I had vetted all these different impacts and their apparent timings, I realized really there's nothing to fix, nothing to save. We've missed every available off-ramp on our way here. And really what my work is about is to provide resources and support for people who are brave enough to lean straight into our fairly imminent future of human-caused collapse of Earth and human systems. And to do that with as much love and grace and beauty as I can possibly muster along the way. So that's in a nutshell what has me be here in this conversation.
Wow. Thank you for doing that.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Yep, there it is.
Beth, if I'm remembering right, you were originally, I've forgotten who has invited you, who made the connection for you and me. Was it Madeline?
She's the librarian at UMass.
Yeah, Madeline Charney.
Madeline Charney.
Yeah. Yeah, she's the ultimate in connector of people. She's a networker. Wow. Well, great. I'm so glad to be meeting you. It is so obvious why we're in this conversation, getting it going. And are you all right with me really leading this and having this be an interview that would go into the category of the conscious parenting program that I and we are creating over here, as opposed to my usual podcast, which is called The Poetry of Predicament, in which thought leaders very much like yourself share what they're up to in their own lives and communities in the face of a predicament-laden world. Not that they don't overlap incredibly, but if it's all right with you, can we have that focus of what is it to be a parent in these times?
Yeah. I mean, that was why I made a Facebook post about an interaction I had with my son about climate change, and it got a lot of responses, and Madeline was one of the responses, was Madeline hooking me up with you. And since then, it's always been part of it for me. Mm-hmm. is how you live with your children, and how we live with the innocent part of ourselves, yes. And still maintain a positive, even joyous way of living.
Yeah,
that's kind of my goal.
All right.
So sure.
Thank you. Thank you. And I know you've said the city or the town where you are. Would you say what state is that in?
Massachusetts.
Massachusetts. Thank you. All right. Well, thank you so much for being here and being yourself and bringing this extraordinary CV of every once in a while I bump into someone who just seems like they have built their life for exactly this moment. And you just seem like one of those people. So I'm looking forward to this conversation. All right. Welcome to another episode of the Poetry of Predicament podcast. And yes, this will also be an episode of Take My Hand, Conscious Parenting in a Time of Stolen Dreams. Both of those podcasts, both of these series of interviews are going quite well. And I'm very, very pleased with the guests that are showing up for each of those two different podcasts, today is really a tough choice for me. I'm more than likely going to have to post this interview in both podcasts, because this particular guest is one of those people that just seems to be built for these times, and also built for the emphasis of both of these podcasts. So the focus, of course, is in both of these podcasts, how shall we comport ourselves in these times of human-caused collapse of Earth and human systems? And in the poetry of predicament, that means thought leaders from all walks of life, and hopefully as many different occupations and perspectives as possible. And speaking specifically to the Take My Hand conscious parenting in a time of stolen dreams. Beth Fairservis is also a parent. So we're going to hear about Beth's other, I don't want to say the word qualification. I do want to say the extraordinary list of elements that she's put together in her own life, in her own weaving together, things that obviously mean a great deal to her. There's just no question in my mind that I will learn a tremendous amount, and I look very much forward to hearing about the various projects and ways in which Beth does her work as a Buddhist pastoral counselor. She also is obviously a talented facilitator in what sounds like both individual and group work of a number of kinds. She's an author. I can't wait for her book to come out. We were just talking a little bit before turning on the record button. And you are a parent, Beth. And so I'm more excited than usual in this conversation to just find out, tell me more. This is extraordinary. First, I guess I would like to start, Beth, by asking you, is there anything that I didn't include in this brief introduction of you? Is there any other element that you'd like to be known for? And would you just presence yourself by letting us know how you'd like to be known?
Thank you, Dean. Yes, I mean, I think it's important to mention that I've done a lot of street theater and large-scale puppet events about climate change for over 10 years now. Mm-hmm. That's a pretty key piece of how I've lived my life in this kind of knowing. Mm-hmm. Is that I've moved into expressing myself in a large scale way with lots of other people. And so I'm a producer on mm-hmm. a large scale of art. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that combined with working one-on-one with people in therapeutic settings. And I've also previously been a birth doula and childbirth educator. And all of that is really very woven together. My art self, my philosopher, my psychologist. I've also been a passionate gardener and I've grown food for many years. So it's, yes, I'm all about where I am right now, where we are on Earth.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, if you don't mind, I would like to kind of step back in history, in your history with you. And I'm wondering if I could start you on that thread of being both collapse aware and a parent. Can we start down that thread?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Okay, great. So one thing that I really enjoyed starting these particular conversations with is asking, what did you grow up with? What was the story you grew up in? And by that, I mean, uh, given however it was that you were raised by your parents, your community, extended family, whatever the influences were on you, what did it look like in your young child and growing up through adolescence, growing up? What did it look like to become a parent? If you were to stay on that track that everyone was telling you about, either consciously or unconsciously. And also, what did it look like it was going to turn out to be a parent?
Interesting question. Well, I had a very extraordinary childhood in that my father was an archaeologist, an anthropologist, and a playwright. And my mother was also an anthropologist and an artist. And we had a big house in Connecticut, and we produced theater every summer. And we had animals, and we had land. I'm deeply privileged. I'm very much coming from the privileged white class. And that's part of my work, is to keep acknowledging my gratitude and to recognize the suffering that supported that. And my dad really, from, as long as I can remember, was talking about the world and what was happening in the world and how it was connected directly to archaeological, anthropological, geological history, cosmogenesis, this understanding. And he was a generalist, so his mastery was in knowing the world on many different levels. And yet specifically pre-dynastic cultures. When did culture begin? When did we start to commodify? When did we start to control nature? And then he wrote these very sort of philosophical plays, apocalyptic plays, because I grew up in the Cold War. So he was very aware of it. The television set was on. We knew. As soon as I became conscious, I knew that we could be in an apocalyptic situation at any moment. And I don't remember not knowing that.
Yeah.
So and at the same time, there was this gorgeous outpouring that came from my eldest sister, who started studying Asian fusion theater. And so I got exposed, because I was the youngest, I was exposed to Indonesian gamelan music and dance, Japanese no theater forms, many different forms of theater, and realized that the moral structure that was coming through other cultures was coming through the arts, and that there could be cultures where the emphasis of knowing how to be in right relationship with nature and knowing how to be in right relationship with each other came through story and art, and the cultural infusion of that everybody's involved, that there are painters, that there are dancers, there are puppeteers, there's everybody, and then you're gardening, you're growing your food. So I grew up knowing that, and this influences my parenting now, in the sense that and maybe even
actually, if I could just pause you there.
Sure.
Because it really rings true for me, what you were just saying about what an incredibly privileged and rich, I mean, rich in the best possible use of the word rich, environment of possibility, of creativity, of immense learning and expansion of possibility. It's almost storybook what you're describing.
Yes.
And so if I may be so bold as just as a listener to what you're sharing, it seems like you grew up with some sort of notion that there was this kind of immense, rich possibility, field of possibilities out ahead of a young person growing up. And then it gets even better as one becomes an adult. Is that fair to say?
On one level, yes. But there
Okay.
was also, of course, dysfunction there. So
Great.
there was
Yeah.
alcoholism there and all of that. But yes, that is me. That is my deepest belief, is that not in idealism, but in actual physical reality, there can be a tremendous amount of abundance and joy and beauty.
Yes.
And that it's a cooperative effort, and that the more that we're involved in it together, the more rich and beautiful it becomes. And I know that in my bones. I've seen it.
Yeah.
Done.
So that's in a nutshell, in obviously a select nutshell, because I understand there's always dysfunction in even the most perfect family, and I'm with you. I get that, but we're looking at what to me is kind of a wireframe of just a contextual framing that you were left with as a child. You were instilled with and left with, like, this rich field of possibility out in front, and as an adult and then as a parent, your job would be to also invite your children or child into a similar and even more expansive field of possibility. Is that safe to say?
Yes.
Great. It's this might be the first person that in this part of the interview that I've had this remarkable field of possibility out ahead of us. So why I ask that question first is to then ask of you to shift gears to now and to share how has that view shifted given the world that we're actually in now? Has that frame, that context, that field of possibility and your relationship and your child's relationship with it, is it different now?
Yes, definitely. In the sense that we're already sort of within Mother Gaia, nature's balancing practice. She's doing something here that's of right relationship with what needs to happen on the planet, and it's unfolding, and it doesn't necessarily include human civilization. That is true, but I think that the unfolding of the practice of life that I learned in my childhood was based on a pretty clear sense of mortality. Mm-hmm. So that still feels like the core impetus for all of my actions is, and this is certainly a Buddhist practice, to contemplate one's mortality is an essential part of liberation. And that's, to take this into a larger spiritual sphere, I feel that this time that humanity is facing is specifically, or not specifically, but really a spiritual expression that's necessary for our evolution, which is that we have to all collectively face our mortality.
Mm-hmm.
And we are, more than we ever have before. But certainly the Cold War was really working that for humanity for a while. And there's an atomization of our consciousness that happened when we discovered that we had that kind of power. And that was, in the 40s, 30s, late 30s, 40s. And so for me, it really sort of began then, once I started studying and sort of looking at what was happening with humanity and consciousness. And it just seems to be as if the explosion has already happened and everything is still moving out, sort of like the Big Bang,
Yes.
And we're still in a very hot place around that, and it's not cooled the way that it did with the Big Bang. It's like things cooled down and eventually could reform into something that was life. But my optimism hasn't changed, though. I mean, I'm a fierce optimist. So
yeah. Before I do want to get there to your optimism and to the extraordinary combination of skills and areas of focus that you bring into your work and obviously into your parenting and so on. I am curious, when you look out into the world, rather than the broad sweep that we were just talking about, when you look out into the world in day-to-day living, I'm curious, are there particular elements of it that really hit you hard, that stay with you? If I'm happy to give you some examples from my own response to that question. I have always been an ocean person. And while I have many other things that I focus on from time to time and keep very much on my screen to be attentive to from time to time and in proportion, it's always the ocean that really takes the number one position. And I'm in these conversations every day. It's just kind of the stuff I need to be working with. But every once in a while, even though I've expanded my capacity to hold these issues and to deal with them and so on, every once in a while, one really knocks me for a loop. It dysregulates me. It just takes me out of an optimal state, and it takes me something to recover. I need to use all my best self-regulation skills to come back and to be able to be present again in the way that I am really committed to. Just a little over a week ago, I was told about an article from the Atlantic magazine that was quite extensive about ocean mining. And there are already a stack of really indisputed fact sets, data sets that are not even projections anymore. They're just what's so about the demise that we are bringing forth in the ocean. And this one really just showed up for me like the last straw, certainly the last straw that I could hold. And this ocean mining is already at a scale, just as it's opening up in this new way, larger way. It's already a larger expression of mining and human impact of that kind, larger than any mining project that has ever occurred. And it's just beginning. Mm. And so for me, that is something that fits right in the container of what matters most to me. It gets my attention, and I reserve a little part of my heart and my daily amount of energy to at this moment just processing it. Just that's the stage I'm in right now, but also when I've expanded my capacity to hold it and I'm at the next stage, I'll put myself in motion the way that I will to engage with that and to be able to hold it in a way that is no longer debilitating and actually moves me forward. Mm-hmm. So thank you for sitting through all that. I just wanted to give you a sense of something that I use to answer that question. Mm-hmm. And I'm curious, what are the things the occurrences in our world, either human systems or earth systems, that concern you?
Well, first of all, I just so deeply appreciate that you love the earth that much, that you love the water, the earth, the ocean that much. Yeah. That's what matters most to me, mm-hmm. is to know people and to know myself, that my love for what is, mm-hmm. is what, and that and whatever process I have to go through to be in relationship with that is part of my journey at this time. Mm-hmm. I just really, really am moved that you are taking that journey so seriously and deeply. It's mm-hmm. really, really beautiful. And I'm about it all. You know, I just I struggle with. I started struggling with the clouds quite a while ago, because the clouds, when I remember white clouds, and I started noticing that there was this gray sort of coming into the base of clouds, and it's got increasingly, the cloud cover has gotten increasingly dense and heavier. And the qualities of the rain is different. Melting snow, I'm around snow, and since my son was born, there was this period, and I read an article a while ago about it, that there was this strange sort of period of about 10 years where it was still maintaining a normal temperature based on previous 100-year before kind of weather. And it was the beginning of my son's life, and the snow was very deep. And we had I have this wonderful community, and we all have had children at the same time. And so we'd all go out and go sliding around on, 3-foot deep snow. And that happened for a while. It was quite a few years where it was very consistent. Snow would come beginning of November, and we had snow. And now it's just, I just noticed it says my internet connection's unstable. So the snow here is very sad. It's very, very deeply sad for many people in New England to not have consistent snow. And the beauty of it, the beauty of all creatures. I have a mother turtle, who comes through our land every spring, and I'm just kind of waiting until she doesn't, even though I know she wants to. I've noticed an increase in the growth of some invasives that are like the bittersweet and poison ivy and ticks, and all these aberrations in nature that come up first when there's a disruption in a biological system. You'll get more thorns, and it's very interesting how nature's like that. When it gets disrupted, the first thing that jumps in are these very hardy, kind of intense plants. So grieving is a huge part of my life. Mm-hmm. And I don't think I would be able to function if I didn't actually sort of allow myself regular grieving periods. I think in terms of humanity too, I just see business as usual continuing. And I feel vulnerable in the face of that because it's so powerful. These cars and this system that we've gotten ourselves locked into is just, oof, it's metallic, it's hard, it's enclosed, it's not easy to access people's hearts.
Yeah.
So that's part of the reason why I'm big on large scale street theater.
Yeah.
Because I know that when I go out there when I stop traffic and I get the police to give me the main street and I, ruffle some feathers and some beauty and there's a brass band, we're changing this business as usual thing.
Yeah.
And I'm looking for the next stage in my life to be that I'm just making that happen as much as possible. No matter what happens, no matter what the scenario is, that there's just a lot of large scale creativity expanding itself outwardly. That's how I work with my grief, is I transform it into action.
Yeah.
But I'm not afraid of being of the bottom. And I encourage my clients and I encourage anyone who's even listening today, don't be afraid to be as sad as you need to be able to recognize how precious this life is.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like, just given your personal history and then your professional history, almost wherever you go, you obviously carry your own self-regulation skill set. And you also, what seems like, are quite generous with a co-regulation skill set, meaning anybody who's in your vicinity with some of these theater performances or any sort of community gathering that you might have put together, a part of each of these is a way we can co-regulate, a way we can all bring ourselves to a space where if grief wants to happen, it can, or if I just need to bring myself back to a level of self-regulation and personal awareness, I can do that, and it just seems to happen. Is that fair to say?
I would so appreciate that you're working with the language of regulation and self-regulation and co-regulation, because that's definitely a part of my core offerings and wanting to continue to offer. So yes, absolutely. And there's this, the polyvagal theory and being able to move our nervous system into a place where we're in community and we're able to have social interaction is, I just feel that the demise of all of our systems has to do with the loss of that regular regulation in our communities.
Yes.
That if we had been continuing to sing and dance with each other, we would be able to make decisions and be more powerful as a force. And we've been really separated and divided. And even here in Northampton, Massachusetts, where there's just this whole area is wonderfully full of dance. There's lots and lots of dance happening. And there's a lot of awareness of co-regulation. I have some wonderful friends who are experts in co-regulation. And even still, it's sort of not connected to the activist community as much. So there's some bridging that needs to happen just to help sort of build the movement, whatever that means.
Yeah. Well, that's definitely where I position myself, is amongst a number of different aspects of the community. You mentioned activists. Those are a natural fit in the kind of neighborhood that I've put myself. And I also have just a strong affinity for what I call the collapse aware community, which does not necessarily imply activism. What I've noticed is that there are a large percentage of the collapse aware community that I'm aware of is not particularly interested in being an activist, and not particularly able to generate much in the way of self-regulation, mostly because they just don't know what it is. What I've seen is that there is no special wisdom that's bestowed upon us on the day of our woke moment. So we might become collapse aware, but I'm still the same jerk that I was, because I've grown up and done all of my work in the atmosphere that I was forced into. There was no choice but to be in the business as usual environment, in which it's built on separation, on competition, on aggression, on microaggression, all the way out to full-blown trauma as it layers into our system, as I'm sure you're actively engaged in your work. So thank you for your acknowledging of that, and I consider us both important elements in our communities, because even our own, locally where I am, it's hit and miss. If even in counseling situations, even in grief agency organizations, maybe you'll get a little training in self-regulation, and probably not. So enough on that point. I actually would like to loop us back, and I appreciate that kind of brief sideline. I'm curious if you would share with us, if you'd be willing to share with us, your son's way of seeing the world, and are you aware of what his concerns are and his way of seeing the world and engaging with the world? Would you mind sharing a little bit of that with us?
Sure. Well, he's grown up in my world with me, obviously. So he's been in climate-related events, street theater events. And I also ran a puppet camp, and I had kids creating activist theater about issues, starting around 8 years old. So we wrote plays, we performed them, and we performed on the street. And he was a very powerful performer from the very young age, very capable with the microphone, unbelievable, really. But in terms of my husband's and my conversations with him about these issues, I don't ask him what he thinks about it. Mm-hmm. I let him come to me about it, and I live my life in the way that I want him to live his life in relationship to it. But I also feel that I want to give him a childhood where he can still believe in his future, and to live in his body as if he is going to have a future, because that's what we all need. And coming to a sense of our mortality is a maturing process that each one of us has to face, whether we're dealing with where we are in time in this history or not. Or all have to face our mortality at some point or another. And that's a maturing process. And at any moment, a meteor could hit the planet and we would all be out, I mean, there could be many other reasons why any one of us are to die. So in terms of children, I feel like it's very important for two reasons. One is that I want his open-hearted, innocent, affirmative perception of the world, which I see consistently in children who are able to be children, that they have a natural sense of justice in them. And that is an essential element of what has formed and continues to form right action in the world. So if I were to impose upon him the depth of distress that we're in globally, I would be putting out a light that needs to be there. So I can't put that light out. I won't do that. Mm-hmm. What I will do, though, is be honest with him if he asks me, and to show him that I am not afraid of talking about it with other people. So he'll go to parties and things like that, and I'm upfront. I don't carry it around as sort of my mission to tell people, because I'm more interested, and this is, this is just who I am. I'm a problem solver. So I'm working on how do I live my life as the solution, and whether the solution works or not, I will have lived my life as the solution. And I want my son to know, wow, my mom really dedicated herself to living her life as the solution. And even as I'm dying in this moment, my son, whenever that comes, he'll be able to know that he has lived in a life that's based in integrity to the truth, without harming his psyche. I don't want to harm anybody's psyche, because our psyches are like this butterfly that can grow and evolve and go through this process of knowing and truth. And so I'm dedicated to that, to being in the truth without harm, without harming others. Yeah. So what else do you want to ask me about that? I feel a little bit.
There's plenty of room right here in this moment for pause. I'm quite renowned for my pauses these days. I'm not interested in going to a whole lot more words just at this moment. I think there's a particular, not gravitas, but there's a heft to what you just shared, that I'm not sure it gets much better than that from my perspective, of a parent wanting to leave an impression, an impress on their child's system that allows them to just know something about that parent. And you've just said that so sweetly, and so there was just enough in what you said. So I just want to appreciate it for a moment.
Thank you so much for hearing me.
For me, it's more than just how that shows up, as it obviously does in your parenting, in your child, in your home relationships. There you are in that party with that orientation of wanting to live your truth, intending to live and speak your truth, and right with it, seamlessly right up with it, is your spoken commitment to do no harm.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, the energy of what you said was indeed deeply consistent with the words. So that's what I'm wanting to pause and just appreciate. Yeah. Do you mind a shift of gears?
Sure.
All right. This is just one of my favorite questions because I have absolutely no ability to predict how someone will respond to it. And I love that kind of wide openness about it. Would you be willing to share with us your definition of hope?
Well, it's interesting because immediately what comes up for me is that I worked with the Sunrise Youth Movement last year for Earth Day. And spent a bunch of hours in meetings with teenagers, and they didn't really want to talk about hope. So I probably would have had a different definition last year before I had met with them than I have now. Yeah, I kind of feel like I learned something important from them, and I'm still in this process that one can have hope or can claim to have hope and be really disconnected from the issues. And it's like spiritualizing something.
Mm-hmm.
Where you know, there's a very difficult thing in front of you, and you might project on that difficult thing, I have hope that it's going to get better. And you can skip over it and walk away from it. I hope somebody else helps that homeless person on the street.
Mm-hmm.
Right? I have prayers and hopes that that will happen. It seems like it's a function of a necessary function of our psyche to be able to cope.
Mm-hmm.
And so I don't deny anybody the wanting to have hope for things to get better.
Mm-hmm.
But I also have a note of cautionary avoidance or denial in it. Because I really come from, in my personal experience, that I spent a lot of time in my youth having hope that I was going to figure out how to be who I am. And that I was going to be able to overcome addiction and alcoholism and a really, really bad sense of self that I had for quite a long time. And a lot of bad choices that I made. And painful choices that I made. And I think it was, I wanted to have hope that the trauma inside my body, the pain, just the visceral pain that I experienced when I was triggered around people, certain people who were harming or couldn't see me, or even just the attempt to try to be a, young blonde woman in Connecticut, trying to figure out what is my life's path,
Mm-hmm.
pain of not having a society that communally supported my growth was just extraordinary. And it really wasn't until I was guided to be able to go into the pain,
Mm-hmm.
and go into the darkness, and go into what is frightening, that I learned how to become myself. So I really come from the like Thich Nhat Hanh's beautiful poem, "Call Me by My True Name."
Mm.
We are everything on earth. We are the murderer, and we are the murdered. We are the snake, and we are the frog. We are the child. We are the grandfather. We're the water. We're everything. We are everything. We are interdependent, inseparable, and all that is. So to become myself, I have to look into the darkness as much as I'm looking into the light.
Yes.
And what I've learned is that the darkness, I call it compost. And I talk to my clients about that. The swamp, the darkness, the fetid, rotting, incomprehensible chaos that happens when there's no form, or form seems to disappear and you're just in your pain, is the most fertile part of your being.
Mm-hmm.
And yet we need each other to go there. Another favorite mentor of mine is Martine Prechtel,
Mm-hmm.
who does amazing grief work and has been a shaman and a teacher, storyteller, and supports the deep dive into our grief in order to be able to know ourselves, to know the earth, to know the beauty. The more we've loved it, the more we love it, the more we lose it. I mean, the more we are aware of the loss.
Yep.
And there's just catching up with that is seemingly impossible. I mean, we have so many things that are being lost and never to be seen again. And so that process of getting people together to really let the grief happen is hugely important. I personally have not been choosing it at this time because I'm still oriented towards large-scale cultural change on the street. But the grief work is always how I get there.
Yeah. Yeah.
So in answer to your question about hope, it's a word. And any word has its potential to represent many things.
Yep.
And I don't want to use it as a Band-Aid.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate it. I know it's kind of a rough ask for me to just throw out divine hope. It's a minefield, and I think you've danced that minefield really beautifully, and particularly your way of pointing to the your tendency, your preference to lean into the shadow, lead into the pain, lead into the dark aspects of self, and somehow having become familiar with that as a way through, and perhaps one of the most important ways through to a new possibility, which, roughly I associate being able to access a new possibility as one way of seeing hope. And I very much in my experience of particularly both the collapse aware community and the denialist community or the willfully ignorant community of much of the world, there sometimes the near-term human extinction crowd at the far end of the spectrum can accuse the willfully ignorant and others of trying to promote hopium, not just hope, but hopium, which appears to be the manifestation of possibility without having to touch anything remotely dark or anything remotely painful. There's got to be a way around this or a way through this that involves only happy. And we can have a Green New Deal with a whole new kind of growth, and we'll continue infinite growth on a finite planet, and everything's going to be just fine. You get the idea.
Yeah, there it is.
So I really appreciate the sobriety and the depth of your response, and particularly your emphasis on including the dives through the darkness when they're called for. I'm very much in your camp with that.
Mm-hmm. I also just wanted to add that I think one of the things that makes that feel not so scary to me is the arts, and even more deeply the body itself being freed up to feel the darkness as a form of self-expression. So when I grieve, I don't just cry quietly. I mean, I make a lot of noise. I move around. I throw my body on the ground. I live my grief in my body. And I think that is important to say, because if somebody is listening to this and doesn't have anybody around them to support them through a process of grief, which is really very, very difficult and almost impossible, really.
Yeah.
If you don't have somebody around you to be with you in your grief, I wouldn't necessarily go there. I would wait till you find somebody that you can just say, hey, can you just be with me? I'm going to sob my guts out in front of you. I may even throw myself on the floor and I'm going to look like shit. Can you just sit here with me while I do this?
Yeah.
And bear witness to me showing you how much I love the world with my heart and my body in this moment.
Yeah.
I just need to say that because it's a messy thing that needs witnessing. And not everybody can do that easily. And so those of us who can should, and those of us who are really fragile need a lot of support to do that.
Wow. Well, you've anticipated my next and final question for you,
Mm-hmm.
which is, are there any elements from your life, from your family life, from your way of seeing the world, way of being in the world, that you could suggest, that you could offer, that you could share to a person who's new to this path? Someone who's just starting to get, this is really happening.
Mm-hmm.
There's a severity, a sobriety that can smack us right in the face if it's a new realization that globally we're engaged in the most important conversation humanity's ever had to face. And it involves ways of being. It invites ways of being that we've never been called to with such ferocity, says me. And it sounds like says you.
Well said. Yes.
And I'm curious if you could share, as if we had a room full of folks for whom this is new, or for whom someone like yourself who has been diving deep into this for your whole life.
Mm-hmm.
Your whole life has brought you to this richness, you are so resourced, you're beyond resourced here. And I'm wondering if you could share a bit with us newbies sitting in the circle with you?
Thank you so much for asking of me, because that's my path, and I'm excited to do this more. And that's what I'm working. My book is really Joyous Warrior Handbook about how to do this. I first of all support everyone to begin to notice their breath. As simple and as strange as that might sound, it's the anchor for life. Our interdependent life is anchored in our breath. And there's just infinite amounts of scientific studies, if you want to get into that, about how bringing your attention to your breath over a period of time calms your nervous system down and helps you to have and evolve a brain that's capable of going through profound experiences. And that's shown over and over again. And lately I've been thinking about this soccer coach in Thailand who was stuck in a cave with his soccer team. I think it was just last year, and they were in pitch darkness, no food, no water, had no way of connecting with anybody. It could be the end of their lives, and they practiced meditation together. And he got them to meditate, and they stayed in meditation for many, 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 many hours. And eventually they were rescued, and the children had to go out, attaching themselves to a diver and go through a very small outlet to get out. And it took tremendous consciousness on their part to stay calm. Mm-hmm. And they did. And they all got out alive because they stayed with themselves. They stayed with their breath. They stayed with their connection to breath. And as a birth doula, I have seen lots and lots of babies get born from mamas who can stay connected to their breath. And there was a lot of power, so much power. Oh my God, just amazing, amazing levels of transformation. Mm-hmm. So that's the first thing, is to really acknowledge that, wow, I have this anchor and it's my breath. If I can keep my consciousness related to my breath, I can think about what I'm facing and at the same time stay connected to my breath, and I'll be able to do it. I can do it. The second thing is gratitude. I feel like gratitude is the core path for loving life, no matter what it is that you're facing. And being a white person of privilege, it's easy to just assume that all this good stuff is around you and you don't have to be grateful for it because it's just there. And when we start to look at people who have been oppressed, the wisdom that has come through their lineage of oppression is that they're grateful for what they have, and that gratitude was the buoying force for their ability to keep going, because ultimately being this earth there's always something to be grateful for. That will never run out. It'll never run out. No matter what happens on earth, we can always, even to our last breath, say, I'm grateful for this last breath.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And then I guess for me, the next piece is get connected, find people and do stuff, talk about it, sing about it, dance about it, get out on the street, get messy, be expressive, utilize the arts. Like if you've been wanting to to sing, join a chorus. If you've been wanting to paint a painting about what you're seeing going on earth, and have an art show. If you know, utilize, so I have a whole thing that's a whole nother piece, which is that I believe in us as the expression of the voice of the earth. We are Gaia, and we are human beings, are the consciousness of the earth. We are the ones who see and feel and hear and can respond and talk about it and make an expression that shows that we see, feel, and hear it. And we do that through the arts, and we've been doing that through eonic time in our cultural, when we're healthy culturally, that's what we're doing. So I just am all about calling in that our intuition, our passion, our sense of justice. This is all Gaia speaking through us, and we can live that as who we are, rather than being caught up in our own small story. It's important to move out of small story and into big story. Helps so much. It helps so much, because yes, it's just too hard and too painful to just think about your particular child not having a future. That is brutally hard to sit with. And if we just sit with it, it will get harder and harder and more painful. If we express it, then at least we have known, and this is my sort of core philosophy, at least the world will have known what we have lost, rather than just letting it go without being conscious of it.
Yeah.
So for those people who are just awakening to such things, I really hope that that is helpful.
Yeah.
I know that it's helped me, and I've been looking at this for a long time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, Beth Fairservis, it has been an absolute delight to meet you and to be witness to your sharing about your growing up, your adulthood, your parenthood, and your creative bent, and your generous sharing of your abundant resourcing, inner resourcing in this life.
Thank you so much, Dean, for asking me questions. It's really powerful to be able to answer, to be able to resource in myself what my answers are to such a profound time. These are rare and precious conversations, and I'm so appreciative that you're asking for them, that you're reaching out to the world and saying, let's talk.
Seems like it's time, yes?
Yes.
It's time to have some conversations. You know, Beth, I'd like to know for myself, but I imagine there might be a few of the viewers here who would like to be able to find out more about you. I personally would like to know, I'd like to keep track of whatever your book launch timing is. I want to be there for that. Can you tell us about how to reach you, how to find out more about what you do?
Well, I have a website that's basically my name, www.bethfairservis.com. And I'm also have the Joyous Warrior Way, which is my Facebook page. And it's just starting. I haven't been really working that page so much. Most people are just friends, you know, a lot of the sharing and but I offer, you know, one-on-one sessions for people online and by phone and in my office to talk about this. And then over this next year, I'll be finishing up the book and looking forward to speaking widely about it, inspiring people, and also inspiring people. One of my visions is that we celebrate Interdependence Day worldwide as a creative act. So I've been doing Interdependence Days for a couple of years now, and I want to see if we can do that internationally. So I'm always looking for people who want to co-create that with me.
Is there some information on your website about that?
Well, if you go to Muzen, muzen.org, that's my theater company. I have two websites. I have my website, and then I have muzen.org. MUZEN. And there's some information about Interdependence Day there on that website. And I'm always looking for people who want to help create those kinds of events in as many places as possible.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Great.
Yes,
I look forward to checking those things out.
Yeah. Yeah. You too. I want to see your book and start looking at more of what you're doing. It's really
well, I've got the 2017 book, The Impossible Conversation, Choosing Reconnection and Resilience at the End of Business as Usual. That's there to be seen. And right now I've really put, I have a book and workbook combination that I have been I spent at least half of 2019 very actively engaged in it. And it looks like it might be shifting for the time being to an online, on-demand series of learning modules that people can do at their own pace. Hopefully they'll do it with other people, and they'll be able to integrate the practices in real time with imagery, with music, with other videos, and so on. It just seems like that might be the way I'm going. So I don't have a current projected date of launch for the new book and workbook, but it's very, very active, and it's happening now in terms of the learning series on the website. So I'm saying all that kind of pointedly to folks who want to find out more. I will be putting all of the information, the links that you just mentioned, Beth, and the ones that I'm just mentioning about my own work in the show notes for this episode of the podcast. And I just want to thank you again for your work, your presence, and your exemplifying what it is to be a resourced and deeply inspired person. It's really been a pleasure.
Oh, thank you so much. You too. I look forward to connecting again.
All right. You take good care, and off we go.
Okay. Blessings. Bye.
Thanks for watching another episode of the Poetry of Predicament podcast, produced by Dean Walker and the Living Resilience Alliance, www.livingresilience.net. Music today from Michael Hedges, as always, and also Port Blue Into the Sea. Also available on our website, www.livingresilience.net, is a wide array of articles, online learning series, arranging group and individual resilience coaching, and sign up for our every other Tuesday free support group that we call Safe Circle Calls.